Hints on Child Training, H. Clay Trumbull. Chapter 3. Scope and Limitations of Child Training. Child training can compass much, but child training cannot compass everything. In determining the powers and the possibilities of a child under training, each child can be trained in the way he should go, but not every child can be trained to go in the same way. Each child can be trained to the highest and fullest exercise of his powers, but no child can be trained to the exercise of powers which are not his. Each child can be trained to his utmost possibilities, but not every child can be trained to the utmost possibilities of every other child. Child training has the fullest scope of the capacity of the particular child under treatment, and child training is limited in every case by the limitations of that child's capacity. A child born blind can be trained to such a use of his other senses that he can do more in the world than many a poorly trained child who has sight. But a blind child can never be trained to discern differences in colors at a distance. A child who has by nature a dull ear for music can be trained to more or less of musical skill. But a child who is born without the sense of hearing can never be trained to quickness in the discerning of sounds. A child can be trained to facility in the use of every sense and faculty and limb and member and muscle and nerve which he possesses. But no training will give to a child a new sense, a new faculty, a new limb, a new member, a new muscle, a new nerve. Child training can make anything of a child that can be made of that child, but child training cannot change a child's nature and identity. The limitations of child training are more likely to be realized than its extensive scope. Indeed, the supposed limitations of child training are very often unreal ones. Many a parent would say, for example, that you cannot change a child's form and features and expression by training. Yet, as a matter of fact, a child's form and features and expression can be, and often are, materially changed by training. The chest is expanded, the waist is compressed, a curved spine is straightened, or a deformity of limb is corrected by persistent training with the help of mechanical appliances. Among some primitive peoples, the form of every child's head is brought to a conventional standard by a process of training. As among other primitive peoples, the feet or the ears or the eyes or the lips are thus conventionally trained into or out of shape. And in all lands, the expression of the face steadily changes under the process of persistent training. As it is with the physical form, so it is with the mental and moral characteristics of a child. The range is wide within the limitations of possible results from the training process. A nervous temperament cannot, it is true, be trained into a phlegmatic one, or a phlegmatic temperament be trained into a nervous one. But a child who is quick and impulsive can be trained into moderation and carefulness of speech and of action, while a child who is sluggish and inactive can be trained to rapidity of movement and to energy of endeavor. An imbecile mind can never be trained into the possibilities of native genius, nor can a moral nature of the lowest order be trained to the same measure of high conscientiousness as a nature that is keenly sensitive to every call of duty and to the rights and feelings of others. But training can give unsuspected power to the dormant faculties of the dull-minded, and can marvelously develop the latent moral sense of any child who is capable of discerning between right and wrong in conduct. The sure limitations of a child's possibilities of training are obvious to a parent. If one of the physical senses be lacking to the child, no training will restore that sense, although wise training may enable the child to overcome many of the difficulties that meet him as a consequence of his native lack. And so, also, if the child have such unmistakable defects of mind and of character as prove him to be inferior to the ordinary grade of average humanity, the wisest training cannot be expected to lift him above the ordinary level of average humanity. But if a child be in the possession of the normal physical senses, and the normal mental faculties, and the normal moral capacities of the human race, he may, by God's blessing, be trained to the best and fullest use of his powers in these several spheres, in spite of all the hindrances and drawbacks that are found in the perversion or the imperfect development of those powers at his start in life. In other words, if the child be grievously deformed or defective at birth, or by some early casualty, there is an inevitable limitation accordingly to the possibilities of his training. But if a child be in possession of an ordinary measure of faculties and capacity, his training will decide the manner and method and extent of the use of his God-given powers. It is therefore largely a child's training that settles the question whether a child is graceful or awkward in his personal movements, gentle or rough in his ways with his fellows, considerate or thoughtless in his bearing toward others, whether he is captious or tractable within the bounds of due restraint, whether he is methodical and precise, or unsystematic and irregular in the discharge of his daily duties, whether he is faithful in his studies or is neglectful of them, whether he is industrious or indolent in his habits, whether the tastes which he indulges in his diet and dress and reading and amusements and companionships are refined or are low. In all these things his course indicates what his training has been, or it suggests the training that he needed, but has missed.